And give me a second on the live stream.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Purim Sameach.
Chag Purim Sameach.
Okay, yeah. Happy holidays, happy Purim. And we're going to start, there's a tradition on Purim. There's a few traditions, right? One of them, I wish the camera could turn or something, but maybe some of you don't like that. Everyone is wearing costumes. And we'll talk about that as we go through the story. Another custom or tradition is doing just that, to read through the story of the Book of Esther. And so we have volunteers to come up and do little portions here. And so I hope that's going to be fun. But let's start out, and the first person could start coming up now and stand on the side for a moment. I want to give a little bit of introduction, a little setting, which is, when does this story happen? Does anyone know? When does this story happen?
Shortly.
Think about in the Bible, there's the Exodus, right? And then there's the kingdom, which is unified under David and Solomon. Then you go through all these different kings, the books of Kings, the books of Chronicles, the good kings and bad kings, right? And then there's an exile. And we go into exile. Where do we go to exile? Well, the northern tribes go to exile in Syria. Where do the southern tribes, because really Yehuda, Shimon, Benjamin, some Levim, where do they go? Babylon. But we don't come back from Babylon, well, kind of, the city Babylon, but not from the empire of Babylon. Where do we wind up coming back from? Persia. The Persians and the Medes, unified empire, conquer Babylon. And so when this story takes place, the Persians are ruling, not the Babylonians anymore. And there's a king we're going to talk about. He's got a few different names. You're going to hear Ahasuerus or Ahashverosh, and he has another name. Do anybody know the other name? Xerxes. Does that name ring a bell? Do you know this guy from anywhere else?
Is that dude from 300?
Yes, he's the dude from 300. And what was that? What was 300? What was that about?
It was about 300 Spartans who whooped some tail against a large number of Persians.
Yeah. 300 Spartans standing against an army of historians, disagree to a large extent about the number of the army, but 1 million-man army coming across a land bridge into Greece and heading down towards Athens, and the Spartans stood in their way in a tiny little path. See, because the Athenians had stood against and fought against Persians earlier on on the coast of Asia Minor, and they didn't like that very much. So they were going to get revenge against the Athenians. Okay, so they go into exile about 586 BC. It lasts for about 70 years. And when it ends, we're supposed to be going back. The Persian emperor at the time, anybody think of his name, who wrote a decree so we could go back to the land? Cyrus. Yeah, or Koresh. And so we're supposed to go back to the land, but a lot of people didn't go back to the land. And you would think, why didn't they go back to the land? They should go back to the land. If they could go to the land, they should go to the land, right?
Yeah.
Well, if they had all gone to the land, then this rescue never would have taken place. It works in mysterious ways, right? They were there for such a time as this, right? They were still there for such a time as this. Okay, so let's go ahead with the first reading. Who's the first reader? So if you could read chapter 1, that would be great.
Oh, okay.
Well, the whole chapter?
Whole chapter. 10 readers, 10 chapters. Hold it to.
These events took place in the time of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. It was in those days when King Ahasuerus, am I saying that right? Sat on his royal throne in Shushan, the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, that he gave a banquet for all his officials and courtiers. The army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the provincial officials were in attendance. He displayed the dazzling wealth of his kingdom and his great splendor for a long time, 180 days. At the end of that time, the king gave a 7-day banquet in the courtyard of the royal palace garden for all the people, both great and small, there in Shushan, the capital. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings fastened to silver rods with cords of fine linen and purple. The columns were marbles. The couches for reclining at table were of gold and silver on a mosaic flooring of malachite, marble, mother of pearl, and onyx. Drinks were served in gold goblets, with each goblet different from the others. There were royal wine in abundance, as befits royal bounty. The drinking was not according to any fixed rule, for the king had ordered the stewards to serve each man what he wanted. Also Vashti, the queen, gave a banquet for the women in the royal house belonging to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was in high spirits from the wine, he ordered Mehuman, Biztha, Harvona, Bigtha, Avagtha, Zetar, and Carcass, and 7 officers who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with the royal crown, in order to show the people and the officials her beauty, for she was indeed a good-looking woman. But the Queen Vashti refused to come at the order of the king, which he had sent through his officers. This enraged the king, and his anger blazed inside him. As was the king's custom, he consulted sages well versed in matters of law and justice. With him were Karshna, Shatar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsna, and Memucan, the 7 vice-regents of Persia and Media, who were part of the king's inner circle and were the most important officials in the kingdom. The king asked the sages, "According to law, what should we do with Queen Vashti, since she didn't obey the order of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the officers?" Memucan presented the king and vice-agents this answer: "Vashti, the queen, has wronged not only the king, but also the officials and all the peoples in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. Because this act of the queen will become known to all the women, who will then start showing disrespect to their own husbands, they will say, 'King Ahasuerus ordered Vashti, the queen, be brought before him, but she didn't come.' Moreover, the nobles, ladies of Persia and Media, who would hear the queen's conduct, would mention it to all the king's officials, who would bring about no end of disrespect and discord. If it pleases his majesty, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written on the laws of the Persians and Medes, which is irrevocable, that Vashti is never again to be admitted into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and that the king give her royal position to someone better than she." When the edict made by the king proclaimed throughout the length and breadth of the kingdom, then all wives shall honor their husbands, whether great or small. This advice pleased the king and the officials. So the king did what Memucan had suggested. He sent all the royal provinces to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, that every man should be master in his own house and speak the language of his own people. Number next one.
So as you were reading, did you, or does anyone out there, do you feel like you have some insight, like some additional information about that passage? Think about that as you're hearing the story. That's one thing. So if you have something to add, go ahead and let us know after the chapter is done. For one thing, what is this party about? The king is having this huge party in his palace, right? Why is he having this big party? Any idea? Remember we talked about the setting? He's about to have to initiate, to start this massive, and he's been waiting for it his whole life, this massive invasion of Greece. And so he's got all his leaders there. This party, this big gathering, is actually their gathering to plan the invasion. Herodotus, do you know who Herodotus is? A Greek historian, famous Greek historian. And he wrote that the Persians commonly drank liquor when they were considering matters of state. Probably not the best idea when you're thinking about matters of state and making decisions about state, but that's what they did. They believed that its spiritual effects, liquor's spiritual effects, helped them to be in touch with the spiritual world when they were making decisions. And so this was a big party with a lot of spirits because they thought they wanted, right, the invasion to go really well. Does that make sense? To them it makes sense, right? Okay. And anything else before we go to number 2? Who's number 2? Are you number 2? Okay, come on up. Chapter 2.
A while later, when King Achashverosh's anger subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants attending him said, "A search should be made for young, good-looking virgins. The king should appoint officials in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the young, good-looking virgins to the house for the harem. In Shushan, the capital, they should be put under the care of Haggai, the king's officer in charge of women, and he should give them the cosmetics they require. Then, the girl who seems best to the king should become queen instead of Vashti." This proposal pleased the king, so he acted accordingly. There was in Shushan, the capital, a man who was a Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Binyamini. He had been exiled from Yerushalayim with the captives, exiled with Yechaniah, king of Yehuda, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babel, had carried off. He had raised Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. Because she had neither father nor mother, the girl was shapely and good-looking. After her father's and mother's death, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's order and decree was proclaimed, and many girls assembled in Shushan, the capital, under the care of Haggai, Esther too was taken into the king's house and put under the care of Haggai. Who was in charge of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, so that he lost no time in giving her her cosmetics, her portions of special food, and 7 girls from the king's palace to attend her. He also promoted her and the girls attending her to the best place in the harem's quarters. Esther did not disclose her people or family ties, because Mordecai had instructed her not to tell anyone. Every day Mordecai would walk around in front of the courtyard of the harem's house in order to know how Esther was doing and what was happening to her. Each girl had her turn to appear before King Achashverosh after she had undergone the full 12-month preparation before prescribed preparation period prescribed for the women, consisting of a 6-month treatment with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and other cosmetics for women. Then, when the girl went to see the king, whatever she wanted would be given to her as she went from the harem's house to the king's palace. She would go in the evening, and on the following day she would return to another part of Hiram's house and be under the care of Shaashgaz, the king's officer in charge of concubines. She would not go to the king again unless he was especially pleased with her and had her summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, whom Mordecai had adopted as his own daughter, to appear before the king, she didn't ask for anything other than what Hegai, the king's officer in charge of the harem, advised. Yet Esther was admired by all who saw her. She was brought to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, Tevet, during the 7th year of his reign. The king liked Esther more than any of his wives. None of the other virgins attained such favor and approval from him. So he put the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The king then gave a great banquet in Esther's honor for all his officers and servants, decreed a holiday for the provinces, and distributed gifts worthy of royal bounty. When the girls would gather on other occasions, Mordecai would sit at the king's gate. Esther had not yet revealed her family ties or her people, as Mordecai had ordered. For Esther continued obeying what Mordecai told her to do, as she had when he was raising her. On one of those occasions when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, two of the king's officers, Bigtan and Teresh, from the group in charge of the private entryways, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai learned about it and told Esther the truth. Esther reported it to the king, crediting Mordecai. The matter was investigated, found to be true, and both were hanged on a stake. All this was recorded in the daily journal that was kept with the king.
Thank you. So we got Vashti. Vashti, when at this party it was going on earlier, right, chapter 1, and they called Vashti to the king. Does anybody know why was Vashti so upset? Why did she refuse the king's order? What does Rabbinic Judaism say about this?
I wanted her to dance and entertain them.
Partly, but
Was it also that she was to just wear the royal crown?
that's it. That's right. Just the royal crown. If you get my drift. She didn't want to do that. And little test here. What was Esther's Hebrew name?
Hadassah.
Hadassah. Okay. And let's see. Now, after Vashti, right, refuses to go at this party and everything, after this party is the invasion. The invasion goes very badly, and they're supposed to have this process set. They're collecting all these women while he's gone. The invasion goes very badly. He comes back and starts going through one woman every night, and then, of course, after he was with them one night, they become concubines, right, until he finds the one he wants to make queen instead of Vashti. It's been about 6 years, actually, by the time he finally picks Hadassah to be his queen. And she hides her identity. Remember, we're in costumes today. She hides her identity. There are a lot of times in history where Jewish people had to hide their identity in order to survive. I wonder if she had not hidden her identity, if she still would have been chosen, if she still would have had favor with, and not had problems among the other women. You don't know, right? Sometimes it's wise, and you have to hide your identity. Other times you need to make a stand, though, right? Other times, not so much. So, let's see. Oh, this thing where Mordecai is standing at the gate. Thank you. So Mordecai, yeah, he's he works near the palace there. He's trying to talk to her through different people because he could not access her once the women are for the king, set aside for the king. He can't really get to talk to her directly. He's got to talk through other people. So he's at the palace kind of a lot now. That's why he's able to hear about this conspiracy, right? And to do something about it. But how many of you noticed what his reward was so far? What did Mordecai get for doing this?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. That's not right, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. But the people who were trying to kill the king, what happened to them?
They died.
How did they die?
They hung
On a stake.
They were hanged.
Gallows.
Hanged. What does that mean? Gallows. What does that mean? What is the word? What does it mean in Hebrew? Anybody know? What do you picture when it says they were hanged?
They were
Like by ropes.
Like by a rope?
Yeah.
Like Old West or something?
Yeah.
That's what you picture. Is that what everybody pictures?
Yes.
Okay. No, not everybody. I'm going to zip to the end of my slides here, close to. You see this picture here?
Yes.
Those people are what you call hanged. I don't know how well you can see. The way that they execute people by hanging them on a tree. Notice what the Hebrew says. Hanged on a tree. It's like get the tree ready. It doesn't say get the gallows ready. I know some people interpret it that way. That's not what it says. They get the tree ready. They would have a platform with a wooden spike going up, sometimes very large wooden spikes, which you'll read about. And here's archaeological evidence what they used to do to execute prisoners. They would impale them on large wooden spikes. That's how they would hang them. That's the hanging. You with me? Okay. So who's number three? Who's our number three? So that's what happened to these two people who conspired against the king.
Sometime later, King Ahasuerus began to single out Haman,
Boo!
the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, for advancement.
Pause 1 second. I don't think we told everybody that part, especially if you're a guest and you don't know. There's some noisemakers. Please raise your hand if you want a noisemaker if you don't have one. Because anytime you hear Haman, ooh, I don't know what's saying. Come on, ooh. You shouldn't even hear you say Haman. You put a block his name out of the book, right? And his name's just coming up now, so we got to make sure we take care of this. So you really want to boo really, really loud. You can boo or make a noisemaker, whatever you want to do, but try to blot out the name of Haman.
So sometime later, King Ahasuerus began to single out Haman, the Agagite, for advancement. Eventually, he gave him precedence over all his fellow officers. All the king's servants at the king's gate would kneel and bow down before Haman because the king had so ordered. But Mordecai neither kneel nor bow down to him. The king's servants at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why don't you obey the king's order? But after they had confronted him a number of times without his paying attention to them, they told Haman, in order to find out whether Mordecai's explanation that he was a Jew would suffice to justify his behavior. Haman was furious when he saw that Mordecai was not kneeling and bowing down. However, on learning what the people Mordecai belonged to, it seemed to him a waste to lay hands on Mordecai. Rather, he decided to destroy all of Mordecai's people Jews throughout the whole of Ahasuerus. I have trouble with his name. Ahasuerus kingdom. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of Ahasuerus, they began throwing pur, that is, they cast lots before Haman every month until the 12th month, which is the month Adar. Then Haman, there is a particular people scattered and dispersed among the peoples of all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people. Moreover, they don't observe the king's laws. It doesn't befit the king to tolerate them. If it please the king, have a decree written for their destruction, and I will hand over 330 tons of silver to the officials in charge of the king's affairs to deposit in the royal treasury. The king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "I have given to you and the people too to do what seems as seems good to you." The king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. They wrote down all Haman's orders, army commanders and governors in all the provinces, and to the officials of every people, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language. Everything was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by courier to all the provinces to destroy, kill, exterminate all Jews, from young to old, including small children and women, on a specific day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to seize their goods as plunder. A copy of the document to be issued as a decree in every province was to be publicly proclaimed to all the people, so that they would be ready for that day. At the king's order, the runners went out quickly, and the decree was issued in the Shushan, the capital. Then the king and Haman sat down, but the city of Shushan was thrown into confusion.
So, thank you very much. And so, when was this decree made? This guy Haman was being right, to get rid of, to exterminate all the Jewish people. Why was he doing that again? Why was he doing that?
Because the Amalekite.
Because what?
He came from the Amalekite.
What? Because he came from a certain people, the Amalekite, who, and one in particular, was a very particular group, the Agagites, right? And we read earlier from the Torah about the Amalekites. What did the Amalekites do? What did they do?
They killed the more weak people at the back.
They attacked the Israelites when they came out of Egypt.
They attacked what? Specifically, they came out in the back, behind, and they got the weak ones, right? The stragglers in behind, attacking the stragglers, the more defenseless, people who were straggling behind, the tired ones and whatnot. So they were attacking, thinking that would be easy. They're the ones that we fought back against with Moses with the staff, right? Hold the staff up, we're winning. Hold the staff down, we're losing. And then so this guy Haman, he was Agagite. When you read about the King Shaul, what's Shaul? Saul, right? King Saul was directed by Adonai because we were told never to forget that we're going to always be at enmity, always be at war with the Amalekites. And King Shaul was told directly to wipe out the Amalekites. And he went out and he wiped out a lot of the Amalekites, but he was confronted by a prophet, Shemuel, because guess what? He didn't get rid of all of the Amalekites. He got rid of most of the Amalekites. He kept the booty, the flocks and herds and that sort of thing, and he kept the king alive. Who was that king's name who he kept alive? Agag. Now the prophet Shemuel came and killed Agag, but apparently he didn't just save Agag, King Shaul, because Agag had descendants who were still alive much later during this story. Haman was an Agagite. He was an Agagite. So there's a problem. Mordecai, right? Yay. He's a hero in the story, right? And he's a good guy. He just saved the king's life, didn't get any reward for it. King doesn't even know his name, but he saved the king's life anyway. And here, he's not bowing to this guy who's an Agagite named Haman. Why isn't he bowing? Why isn't he bowing? So, I've heard people say, to bow to something there's sometimes when you bow, you're giving reverence, like you're worshiping, but that's not always the case. It's not always the case. You see Yaakov. Who's Yaakov?
Jacob.
Jacob, when he's returning to the land, And his brother is out there coming towards him with hundreds of armed men. What does Yaakov do when his brother's drawing near? He's bowing down to him several times. When Yisrael is coming from the land during the famine to see Yosef, and they're coming into the land, and again it's Yaakov, is coming in front of, before Parao. Who's Parao? Pharaoh. He really looks good with that king outfit on. So when he's coming before Parao, what does Yaakov do before Parao? Bows before Parao too. Was Yaakov worshiping Esau?
No.
Was he worshiping Parao?
No.
No. There are times when you see people bowing and it's not worship too. It can be part of worship, and it often is part of worship, but that's not necessarily what it is. But he is disrespecting Haman, the Agagite, who is from these people who were attacking the stragglers and trying to wipe out, the weaker people of Israel, who were attacking the more or less defenseless people, and who God told us we need to be at war with all the time. And he was disrespecting him when he had this authority. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What else? Haman comes up with this evil plot, right? When does he come up with this plot? When is he come up with this plot? When is he casting the poor? Purim is plural for poor. When is he casting the poor? The first month, what day?
The 15th.
The 13th. The 13th of Adar. Is 13 unlucky? I don't know. So here's Haman. He's testing the poor. He said, when are we going to kill the Jewish people? Right? And he's doing it on the 13th day of the first month. What's significant about the 13th day of the first month? What happens on the 14th day of the first month?
The Pesach.
The Passover Seder. This is right before Passover. He's doing this. And the day it's supposed to be carried out is what day? Do you remember? He said, also the 13th day of the 12th month. So when this decree goes out, it's like almost a year that the people are, you got to imagine there's a death sentence hanging over your head for like a year. For just about a year. From the 13th of the first month to the 13th of the 12th month, this is going on. So almost a full year. This sentence is over their heads. And it looks like the 13th is going to be a very bad day, a very unlucky day. Yuck. Right? But we don't know if that's what's going to happen or not yet, do we? All right. I think that's all I got for that chapter. The Urim and the Thummim are sort of a kind of a pur, also. Pur. Who's number 4?
When Mordecai heard everything that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went throughout the city, lamenting and crying bitterly. He stopped before entering the king's gate, since no one was allowed to go inside the king's gate wearing sackcloth. In every province he reached by the king's order and decree. There was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay down on sackcloth and ashes. When the girls and official attended Esther came and informed her of this, the queen became deeply distressed. She sent clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So Esther summoned Hattach, one of the king's officials, attending her, and instructed him to go to Mordecai and find out what this was all about and why. Hattach went to Mordecai
Yay!
in the open space in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai
Yay!
told him everything that had happened to him and exactly how much silver Haman had promised to put in the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the decree for their destruction issued in Shushan, so that he could show it to Esther, explain it to her, and then instruct her to approach the king, intercede with him, and implore his favor on behalf of her people. Hathach returned and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him this message for Mordecai. All the king's officials, as well as the people in the royal provinces, know that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king in the inner courtyard without being summoned, there is just one law. He must put to death, unless the king holds out his gold scepter for him to remain alive. And I haven't been summoned to the king for the past 30 days. Upon being told what Esther had said, Mordecai asked them to give Esther this answer. Don't suppose that merely because you happen to be on the royal palace, you will escape any more than any other Jew. For if you fail to speak up now, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from different directions. But you and your father's family will perish. Who knows whether you didn't come into your royal position precisely for such a time as this. Esther had them return this answer to Mordecai.
Yay!
Go assemble all the Jews to be found in Shushan, and have them fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, drink for 3 days, night and day. Also, I, the girls attending me, will fast the same way. Then I will go to the king, which is against the Jews, against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Then Mordecai went his way and did everything Esther had ordered to him.
Thank you. Yay!
Yay!
So that's what that was about, that song about, touch me with your scepter, Lord, but talking about Yeshua, right? Imagine what she was going through. I mean, we read the story long afterwards, right? Whatever. But for her, the law was if you go into the king's court and he doesn't hold out the scepter to you, that's it. That's your life. Your life is over. They will kill you right there. And she was not feeling like she's having the king's favor. She hadn't been admitted into his presence for a long time. So this took a lot of boldness. Notice also what she asked them to do. What did she ask them to do for her?
Fast.
Now, I'm glad you said that. You said fast, that's correct. We assume and pray.
I wouldn't say.
That's another word that doesn't appear in the book of Esther. It doesn't have God's name or any version of it. It doesn't talk about Torah. It doesn't mention praying. Just fasting. And we think, but they go together, right? Maybe they do. You know, you can be in a culture.
Yeah, but they are Jewish. They are not a culture that don't fast and pray.
You can be in a culture where you can't do things or say certain things openly because of persecution. You know? A culture where you didn't speak openly, couldn't speak openly about God without being persecuted. That's kind of what it was like in those days. It's kind of what it was like in those days, which may explain why Esther's written the way it was written. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. It almost seems like Esther needed to be threatened to go to the king.
She needed what?
She needed to be threatened. It's like, if you don't go, your family's gonna perish. It's like, so are you bold, or are you just be threatened now?
Yeah, she had to be extremely bold. I mean, what Mordecai says, if you don't go, you and your family are going to die. And deliverance will come, and it'll come from someone else. Why did he know that deliverance would come? If it didn't come through her, it was going to come. How did he know that?
Because the prophecies.
Because of prophecies about what?
The Messiah.
The Messiah, and the Messiah would come through the Jewish people. So the Jewish people were going to survive. Maybe not all of them. Maybe it would be horrible. Who knows? But they would survive. But she's right in the palace. And they're going to find out sooner or later. Right? Who's the next reader?
That would be you?
And she makes this statement. I'm going to go, after the 3 days I'm going to go, and if I perish, I perish.
On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courtyard of the king's palace, opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the king's hall across the entrance to the hall. When the king saw Esther the queen standing in the courtyard, she won his favor, so the king extended the gold scepter in his hand toward Esther. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it you want, Queen Esther?" the king asked. "Whatever your request, up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." "If it is all right with the king," answered Esther, "let the king and Haman come to the banquet I have prepared for him." The king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so it can be done." So the king and Haman came to the banquet Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "Whatever your request, you will be granted it. Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, it will be done." Then Esther answered, "My request, what I want, is this. If I have won the king's favor, if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I want, let the king and Haman come to me, which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." That day Haman went out to meet the king. But when Haman at the king's gate, that he neither rose nor moved for him, Haman was furious. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself in his home. When he summoned and brought his friends and Zeresh his wife. Haman boasted of his wealth, his many sons, and everything connected with how the king had promoted him and given him precedence over the other officials and servants of the king. Indeed, Haman said, "The queen, let nobody in the banquet with the king that she had prepared except myself. And tomorrow too I am invited by her together with the king. Yet none of this does me any good at all, as long as I keep seeing Mordecai the Jew seated at the king's gate." At this, Zeresh, his wife, and with all his friends said to him, "Have a gallows 75 feet high constructed, and in the morning speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged. Then go in and enjoy yourself with the king at the banquet." Haman liked the
Again, the translation, have a tree, prepare a tree. It doesn't say gallows. Let's see. His wife, boy, she's something, right? Zeresh. She's a little cold-blooded or something. Yeah.
It's like
Boy, there was something here. So the bad translation and it'll come to me if it's important. 75 feet high. The stake is 75 feet high. Why do you suppose it's that high? What's the point of that?
So that everybody can see.
So everyone can see. Yeah. That's why, like the Romans, when they crucified people, they did it on the side of the main roads, so that it was right by the side of the road. It wasn't like up on top of a hill or something. It was right next to the road. You would walk right by people being crucified. Here's the next reading. Oh. And this guy Haman, boy, he's posting and everything about how rich he is and everything. Oh, why did the banquet, right? So why does she hold a banquet? She's holding a banquet just so she could talk to the king, and Haman would be there, right? Because it involves him, and she needs to see what's going to happen to Haman. So there's going to be some kind of decision made about this Haman guy. So that's the situation. But then when it comes time, when the king asks her what she wants, imagine being Esther in that moment. And you have to think, maybe she's just a little bit nervous since her life is hanging in the balance. Probably really nervous, right? That might be, you think, well, why does she make it a second banquet? Why does she not just tell him right there? Maybe she was a little too nervous and she said, you come back tomorrow, I'll tell you tomorrow. Right? Give her a little more time to think about how she's going to say this to him. Because Haman is like the king's right-hand man. He's the king's right-hand man. And you're going to say this about him. You're going to reveal this about him. It's pretty scary. Pretty scary. Chapter 6, right?
That night the king couldn't sleep, so he ordered the records of the daily journal brought, and they were read to the king. It was found written that Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers from the group in charge of the private entryways, who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. The king asked what honor or distinction was conferred on Mordecai for this. The king's servants answered, nothing was done for him. The king then asked, who's that in the courtyard? For Haman had come into the outer courtyard of the king's palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. The king's servant told him, it's Haman standing there in the courtyard. The king said, have him come in. So Haman came. The king said to him, what should be done for a man that the king wants to honor? Haman thought to himself, who would the king want to honor more than me? So Haman answered the king, for a man the king wants to honor, have royal robes brought, which the king himself wears, and the horse the king himself rides, with a royal crown on his head. The robes and the horse should be handed over to one of the king's most respected officials, and they should put the robes on the man the king wants to honor, and lead him on horseback through the streets of the city, proclaiming ahead of him, this is what is done for a man whom the king wants to honor. The king said to Haman, hurry and take the robes and the horse as you said, and do this for Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Don't leave out anything you mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, dressed Mordecai and led him riding through the streets of the city as he proclaimed ahead of him, "This is what is done for a man whom the king wants to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in mourning. After Haman had told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is a Jew, you will not get the better of him. On the contrary, your downfall before him is certain." While they were still talking with him, the king's officials came, hurrying to bring Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared.
Thank you. And back to this statement, where she goes in, daring to go into his presence, daring to go into the presence of the king. I mean, that's a picture from one of the movies, right? Where she dares to go in, and they had to make it extra theatric, like it's raining outside, so she's all wet and stuff too, whatever. So she'd be miserable if she dies as well. And so, but she had to have what we call emunah, right? She had to have some serious faith to go in front of the king, right? And what is emunah again?
Faith.
Faith, but what does it mean? Faith, what kind of faith? Like mental assent?
No.
Like, I know there's a God, so I'll do whatever I want. What is it?
Faith that is evidence.
Faith that is evidenced by your actions, right? A faith that you live by.
Yes.
That's some serious action right there, some serious faith. Yeah. And so, twist of events, right?
Funny.
Haman thinks he's got it made. Second to the king. And what is this business about signet ring he's wearing and the things he wants to do, like ride the king? What would that be in today's culture? I want to be riding on the king's mule.
Like driving the president, flying on the president's
Air Force One, right? I want to be riding on Air Force One. And the king's signet ring, what does that mean? What's this king's signet ring? What can you do with a signet ring? Stamp what kind of? You can make decrees, right? Royal decrees. You have the authority of the king with the signet ring. Yeah. This guy doesn't want much, does he? And to be led around with people proclaiming, "This is what happens to someone who honors the king." Oh man. But things start to take a very sudden, very drastic twist. Who's the next reader?
You already know the names now?
I've been voluntold as tribute.
Okay, we gotta shorten this down. Yes.
So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And the king again said to Esther at the wine banquet, whatever your request, Queen Esther, you will be granted it. Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom, it will be done. Esther, the queen, answered,
"If I have won your favor, king, and if it pleases the king, then what I ask is to be given me my own life and the lives of my people. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and exterminated. If we had only been sold as men and women slaves, I would have remained quiet, since our trouble would not have been worth the damage it would have caused the king to alter the situation."
King Ahasuerus asked Esther, the queen, "Who is he? What is the man who has dared to do such a thing?"
And Esther said, "A ruthless enemy. It's this wicked Haman."
Haman stood aghast, terrified with the king and queen. In the rage, the king got up from the wine banquet and went out to the palace garden. But Haman remained, pleading with Esther, the queen, to spare his life. For he could see that the king had decided what the king had decided to do to him. Haman had just fallen over the house where Esther was when the king returned from the palace garden to the wine banquet. He shouted, "Is he even going to rape the king here in the palace before my very eyes?" Queen. That'd be a little weird. The moment these words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harvona, one of the king's attendants, said, "Look, the gallows 70 feet high that Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke only good to the king, is standing at Haman's house." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's anger subsided.
Good job.
Come on, Denise, you gotta go again.
Yeah,
So,
There's chapter 8.
8, 9, 10. Oh, okay.
Well, I thought it was at the
isn't it interesting, I mean, it may be that Esther was so nervous that she had to make a second banquet, but God used that second banquet.
I know, it was
Right?
at the right time.
That gave the king extra time, made him more anxious about it. He couldn't sleep that night. He was so anxious. He couldn't sleep so much that he actually asked to hear the Chronicles. How many of you read the Chronicles? Of course, these are different Chronicles. These are different Chronicles. But still. The King's Chronicles, pretty dry, right? They're pretty dry. Well, there's some good stuff in there, but they're pretty, comparatively speaking, they're pretty dry.
Just it comes out the chronicle of the good things of Mordecai.
And what did they wind up reading about from those Chronicles? Just happened to be reading the part in the Chronicles about Mordecai saving the king. And the question happens to come up, which is why I brought it up earlier, right? What did they do for Mordecai? Nothing. And now the king recognized that. And that's why he does this big dog and pony show, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay. And when she does confront him at the second banquet, the king leaves, but Haman doesn't leave. There's a problem there that I don't know if you're aware of. Culturally, contextually, no one but the king would dare to be alone with the king's wife or a member of, or any member of his harem without the king being there. Haman should have left with the king. He should have left with the king, but he stayed behind, he and the queen alone. Not allowed.
No.
You with me? Not allowed. Okay. When Haman when someone is branded a traitor, right, and is executed, his estate would revert to the crown. So it would belong to the king, and he could give it to whoever he pleases. Who's the next reader?
Joel.
All right.
Mordecai.
Practicing. Yay!
Okay. Forgive my Spanish, please. That same day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Esther, the queen. Also Mordecai appeared before the king, for Esther had revealed his relationship to her. The king removed his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's house. Again, Esther spoke to the king. She fell at his feet and begged him with tears to put an end to the mischief Haman had caused by the scheme he had worked out against the Jews. The king extended the gold scepter toward Esther. So Esther got up and stood in front of the king. She said, "If it pleases the king, if I have won his favor, if the matter seems right to the king, and if I have his approval, then let an order be written reciting the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the royal provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster that will overcome my people? How can I endure seeing the extermination of my kinsmen?" King Ahasuerus said to Esther, the queen, and Mordecai the Jew, "Listen, I gave Esther the house of Haman. They hanged him on the gallows because he threatened the lives of the Jews. You should issue a decree in the king's name for whatever you want concerning the Jews, and seal it with the king's signet ring, because a decree written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring can be resigned by anyone." The king's secretaries were summoned at that time on the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan, and a decree was written according to everything Mordecai ordered concerning the Jews to the army commanders, governors, and officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its script, and to each people in their language, also to the Jews in their script and language. They wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. They sent the letters by couriers on horseback, riding fast horses used in the king's service, and bred from the royal stock. The letters said that the king had granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and defend their lives by destroying, killing, and exterminating any forces of any people or province that would attack them, their little ones or their women, or would try to seize their goods as plunder on the designated day in any of the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the edict was to be issued as a decree in every province and proclaimed to all the people, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance against their enemies. Couriers riding fast horses used in the king's service left quickly, pressed by the king's orders, and the decree was issued in Shushan, the capital. Meanwhile, Mordecai left the king's presence arrayed in royal blue and white, wearing a large gold crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan shouted for joy, for the Jews all was light, gladness, joy, and honor. In every province and city where the king's order and decree arrived, the Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. Many from the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews had overcome them.
All right. Took away that signet ring from Haman, gave it to Mordecai. Gave the property, the house to Esther, actually. That was a huge empire. Wow. Hey, what's this thing? Mordecai left the king's presence arrayed in what? What was he arrayed in again? What was he wearing?
Linen, fine linen.
What the
Fine linen.
What color?
White and blue.
Blue and white. Royal colors, blue and white. What's that remind you of?
Israel.
Yeah.
It also reminds us of the tzitzit.
What's this phrase remind you of? For the Jews all was light, gladness, joy, and honor. Does it sound familiar?
Celebration.
Huh?
Happiness. Celebration, feast, party, joy.
Eating.
Oh.
Good. Be happy.
Havdalah. Havdalah. If you're doing Havdalah, you're hearing that every week. The Jews had light and joy, gladness and honor, so may it be for us. So may it be for us. Mm-hmm. And many of the peoples of the land became Jews. That's interesting, right? Who's the next reader? Many of the people became Jews because fear of the Jews had overcome them. Who's next?
Zach.
Zach.
Chapter 9. Good Shabbos. If you guys would be a little patient with me, I'm kind of recovering from an illness, but it's all good. Hashem brought me here, so good Shabbos. What's that? Okay. Okay, we're going to start chapter 9. Okay. The time approached for the king's order and decree to be carried out, the day when the enemies of the Yehudim hoped to overpower them. But as it turned out, the opposite took place. The Yidden overpowered those who hated them. Thus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, on the month of Adar, the Yidden assembled in their cities throughout the provinces of King Achashverosh, that date from the movie 300, to attack anyone who tried to do them harm, and no one was able to withstand them, because all the peoples were afraid of them. All the officials of the provinces, the army commanders, the governors, and those occupied with the king's affairs helped the Jews because they were afraid of Mordecai. Yay! For Mordecai, yay! Had become a powerful person in the king's palace, and his fame had spread through all the provinces. Mordecai, yay! Continued to grow increasingly powerful. The Yidden put all their enemies to the sword, and there was great slaughter and destruction, as they did whatever they wanted to those who hated them. In Shushan, the capital of the Jews, slaughtered 500 men. Ooh, 500, okay. They put to death the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamdata, the enemy of the Jews, Parshandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Porata, Adalia, Alidata, Palmashta, Alisai, Alidai, and Baitata. Okay. But they did not touch the spoil. The same day, after the king had been told the number of those killed in Shushan, the capital, he said to Esther, the queen, if the Jews have slaughtered 500 men in Shushan, the capital, and the 10 sons of Haman, what have they done in the rest of the royal provinces? Now, whatever you request, you will be granted it. Whatever more you want, it will be done. Esther, sorry, can't whistle. If it pleases the king, let the Yidden in Shushan act again tomorrow in accordance with today's decree. Also have Haman 10 sons hanged on the gallows. The king ordered these things done. A decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. So the Yidden in Shushan assembled also the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Shushan. But they did not touch the spoil. The other Yidden, those in the royal provinces, had assembled, defended their lives, and won rest from their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them, but without touching the spoil. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, so on the 14th day of Adar, they rested and made it a holiday for celebrating and rejoicing. However, the Yidden in Shushan assembled on both the 13th and the 14th days of Adar. So it was on the 15th that they rested and made it a holiday for celebrating and rejoicing. This is why the Jews of the villages, those who live in unwalled towns, make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day for celebrating and rejoicing, a holiday and a time for sending recorded these events and sent letters to all the Yidden in the provinces of King Achashverosh, both near and far, instructing them to observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day every year, to commemorate the days on which Yidden obtain rest from their enemies, and on the month which for them was turned from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday. They were to make them days of celebrating and rejoicing, sending portions of food to each other and giving gifts to the poor. So the Jews took it upon themselves to continue what they had already begun to do, as Mordechai had written to them, because Haman, son of the Hamdata, the Agagi, the enemies of the Yidden, they had plotted against the Yidden to destroy them, and had thrown pull, that is, cast lots, to crush and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he ordered by the letters that Haman's wicked scheme, which he had plotted against the Yidden, should recoil on his own head, and that he and his sons would be hanged on the gallows. This is why these days have been called Purim, after the word pull. Because of everything written in this letter, and what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had come upon them, the Jewish people resolved to take it upon themselves, their descendants, and all who might join them. And without fail, they would observe these 2 days in accordance with what was written in this letter at the appointed time every year. And that these days would be remembered and observed throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim would never cease among the Jews, on their memory be lost by their descendants. Then Esther, the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordechai, the Jew, gave full written authority to confirm the second letter about Purim, thus sent copies of it to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Achashverosh, ensuring their peace and security, requiring them to observe these days of Purim as their designated times, as Mordechai, the Yid, and Esther, the queen, had enjoined them, as they established for themselves and their descendants concerning the matters of fasting and lamenting. At Esther's order, these matters of Purim were confirmed and put in writing in the book. Ooh, I totally got an insight, but I'm still debating whether I should say it. But anyways, so generally we think of this holiday as just kind of like a minute, just a custom. It's something that's not completely necessary. However, I would like to maybe raise the question or argument that this holiday might actually be more required than what's commonly assumed, because in the Torah and in many, and also in some of the writings, the Ketuvim, we're actually commanded to obey decrees by the judges, the Shoftim, by the prophets, by the Leviim, the priests, and also by kings, and I'm assuming queens as well. So we actually have this given, and also Numbers 11, for example, tells that the Holy Spirit came upon the Shoftim, the elders that would later become the Sanhedrin. But anyways, so since Haman actually made this a decree, and then Esther had to put her, she's a queen now, put her stamp on it, that pretty much means that it's basically a Torah mitzvah to actually obey this holiday, to celebrate this holiday. At least the argument can be made. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. It was because of this wonderful woman who was willing to almost sacrifice herself for the Jewish people. We actually have a holiday that we're required to celebrate. So I just think that's really cool. But yeah, and it's interesting because even like, for example, the judges, their decrees were actually even called in Hebrew Torah, in the Torah. So I don't know. I just found that really interesting. But anyways, thanks for listening.
But he meant that Mordecai made that decree, though, right?
Mordecai, and then
Not
Esther
Haman.
stamped it.
Boo.
Let's see here. We had the battle. We had. What are we supposed to do on Purim? What? Of course, If you happen to live in Persia, then that would be a decree. Your ruler's telling you. So yeah, you would have to do. How many of us live in Persia? So that's something to consider. But what are we supposed to do on Purim? What does it say that we're supposed to do? What did they do?
Celebrate with food, send food to give food and
To the poor. Yeah, give gifts and food to the poor. They give gifts to each other too, but gifts for the most part to the poor. So when Purim comes around, if you want to celebrate it the way the Bible says celebrate it, the Bible doesn't talk about, she didn't come in and reread the story, but she does say how you're supposed to celebrate. Mordecai does, and then she verifies is that by giving gifts to the poor. Oh. Notice also the battle that they fought. It says more than once, 2-3 times, at least it was like, but they did not what?
Touch the spoil.
Touch the spoil. It was not about money. It was just about survival. It talks about Haman, his plan was to make a lot of money off of this extinction of the Jewish people himself and pay back himself, because he was telling the king he would take care of the expenses, but he was going to get all the money from the Jewish people dying. So for him it was about money, but for the Jewish people it was about just defending their lives. It was not about money. So who got the money for people who were traitors again? The king, the royal house got that money. So the king got rich from this instead. All right. And what tribe was Mordecai from again? Benjamin's tribe. And who was it that messed up against Agag?
Oh, wow.
Shaul, who was from the tribe of Benjamin. And so it makes a point here when it says that what did he do? Haman's been long gone, right? What did he do to Haman's sons? They were all impaled and hanged on the stake too, right? Impaled on the stake too. All 10 of his sons. It makes a point of telling us that he did not make the same mistake that Shaul had made in allowing some of the Amalekites, the Agagites, to live. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's a different story here than before. Who's the last reader?
King Ahasuerus laid tribute on the land, the coasts and the inlands, all the acts of his power and his might, along with a full account of the high honor which the king advanced Mordecai. Yay! Are written in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai, the Jew, was second only to King Ahasuerus. He was a great man among the Jews, popular with all the many countrymen. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all their descendants. Amen.
Amen.
And that brings us to Hassof. What's Hassof?
Hassof?
The end.
The end. And what do we do when we're done with the story? We party. And so we have something to say. What's it say right there?
Chag Purim Sameach.
The cookies are talking. I think something strange about that. Well, let's go talk back to the cookies, all right? We'll get a blessing first. And do we have challah and grape juice ready? All right, so we'll do that after the blessing. But one thing before that, one thing though is I want you to know, even though these people are in a culture, in a place, a circumstance where it's not proper for them to be talking openly about God, even though the story they write doesn't talk about God, God is still there. God is still working all things together for their good anyway. You see? Whatever happens in our culture, whatever happens in our day, don't lose your emunah, don't lose your faith. Don't lose your faith. God is still there. Whatever you see, whatever whatever happens, stay faithful. Amen?
Amen.
Okay, let's come together for the blessing. You can cut that anytime.